Yeah, whatalofa to it's Tim Tafunga here. It's a nice, partially cloudy day here in Brisbane, Australia. Right, and it's the 10th of February, Friday afternoon. It's the 10th of February 2023. It has been nearly a year since the Russians launched their special operation in Ukraine, in which the whole Western world had considered as a invasion of Ukraine, in which I would disagree. I would say it was a raid of Ukraine by a special Russian military operation with a very partial mobilization of troops and mechanized BTGs, up to about 100,000 or so Russian troops, which also included a airborne BTG that made a hastened airdrop onto a Kiev airport just off the outskirts of Ukraine, with some 200 or so commandos. You wouldn't consider that as an invasion force at all. Rather, it's like a blitzkrieg little canaries down a mine shaft incursion, just to warn Ukraine what the Russians were about to do. Okay, first of all, let's recall the initial objectives of President Putin's special military operation, which was A, to demilitarize the Ukrainian military, B, to denazify the Ukrainian neo-Nazi elements within Ukraine. On both accounts, the Russians have achieved their objectives. A, they have completely annihilated all known Ukrainian military assets, so much so to the point that they've had to rely upon the Bucharest 9 NATO-supplied Soviet-made weapons. Who are the Bucharest 9? Well, the Bucharest 9 are the former Warsaw Pact member nations, headed by Poland, whom have supplied material support and mercenary supports for the Ukrainian forces. We all know that Ukraine are completely demilitarized. The Russians had annihilated and destroyed practically all of the airfields, destroyed every single aircraft that they ever had. Numerically, Ukraine only had about 230 aircrafts. They included fighter jets and transport aircrafts. The Russians had completely destroyed them. And so far, according to the official statistics, the Russians have destroyed 340 Ukrainian fighter jets. Now, how did Ukraine suddenly have more fighter jets than they had before the special military operations? Well, the obvious answer is the Bucharest 9 have been giving Ukraine Soviet era fighter jets. NATO had refused to give them European fighter jets and American fighter jets for the obvious reasons, because it would imply that NATO was directly involved, and therefore Russia could assume that NATO is directly engaged in a conflict against their forces. Tentatively, what we have now is a partial mobilization of NATO forces into Ukraine. This partial mobilization includes German, British and American tanks, MBT, main battle tanks. Recently, as everybody knows, the Americans have been supplying HIMARS, Australia has been supplying 155 howitzers and Bushmasters. which means that we are directly aiding and abetting the Ukrainian neo-Nazi regimes and the fascist regimes of the collective NATO forces, which are, there's no qualms about it, they are fascist. For instance, they're symbols of the bundle of rods amongst all of NATO countries. The French passport holders have the bundle of rods as part of their French national passports. Everyone has fascism, the bundle of rods, fasci, as their symbols of their United European Holy Roman Empire. So fascism is back in vogue now, since Nazi Germany had discredited fascism. So now it's trendy to have a bundle of rods of an expansionist NATO empire, and now they've called it NATO. And America is the hegemon of this so-called fascist bundle of rods of collective European nation states, a federation of European states confronting the Russian Federation. It is a federation, by the way. It's made up of all different oblasts, republics, and different ethnicities and nationalities within a Russian federation. So it's called the Russian Federation for obvious reasons. It's not a homogeneity, nationalist Russian culture as many people are alluding to, a Nazi Russian regime, which is incorrect. It's made up of a nation collectively of different cultures, including Chechnya, Caucasus, with their various levels of cultural people speaking their own languages. Now, what we have now is a new situation where NATO is now subscribing to a fascist ideology, which is acceptable by Western mainstream society. Whereas Russia, on the other hand, is promulgating the liberation of the Donbass people. The Donbass people themselves are culturally Russian people. It always has been. Prior to 1991, it was part of the Soviet Union. Culturally, these people were all Russian speakers and always have been. Crimea was given to Russia, was given to Ukraine by President Khrushchev back in 1954 as part of a plea bargain for an election victory for President Khrushchev, which President Putin refuses to acknowledge and accept that undemocratic process of ceding Russian territory to the Ukrainians, and then thus resulting in the Black Sea fleet of the Russian Navy not having a seaport in the Black Sea. That had to be amended with the 2014 Sevastopol reamalgamation of the Crimea Peninsula and Oblast within Russia. Now, that was a resounding success, as well as the referenda that was conducted by the DPR and LPR. Later on, the LPR themselves conducted their own referenda, which was considered as a sham. It cannot be considered as a sham because the local people were always Russian people to begin with, including the Crimeans, the Donetsk People's Republic, and the Lugansk People's Republic. They were always culturally Russian people. The people who are saying that they're Ukrainians are a minority, and they were all parachuted as politicians and political leaders in order to replace the local Russian people that resided there. How do I know all this? Because I've been researching this situation as a national security analyst for decades. From the moment the collapse of the Soviet Union, when Kushma comes into power, and the alleged Gazprom siphoning of Gazprom oil beneath Ukraine, the siphoning of billions of dollars worth of Gazprom profits and oil reserves that were being that were destined for European markets, but that were actually siphoned by the Kushma regime, which of course led to the Orange Revolution of 2004 and the other revolutions and subsequent allegations of the most corrupt country in Europe being Ukraine from the 90s through to the millennia. So that has changed the situation, as we now know. Now, subsequently, we have the special military operation that has started since 2022. Now, today, I want to expand upon the present situation that's going to morph from the Ukrainian conflict and not only the liberation of Donbass and Crimea, Zaporizhia and Kherson and so forth, as we all now know. Kharkov Oblast is also vying for their liberation. However, since most of the KPR political leaders have all been neutralized, they've suddenly disappeared. The SBU have shut them down, so the local pro-Russian elements within Kharkov have been eliminated. So there's no resentment from there, and there's no more marches of pro-Russia marches anymore. Now, what's happening now? Thanks to the Ukrainian pleas to NATO to bring German tanks, we have the 80th anniversary of the Patriotic War. We have the Leopard 2 tanks, the Abrams, and the Challenger 2 tanks from Britain, which are about to be deployed onto the Russian steppes once again. Now, I've just been watching the Battle of Stalingrad documentary on YouTube, and anyone can access that, and you can have a look at it. Just YouTube, Google, search the Battle of Stalingrad, and you will recognize all the familiar locations of the Donbass region and the battles that was last at these areas since 1942-1943, which is the Wehrmacht, the Sixth Army march through the Donbass region on its way to Volgograd, which was then known as Stalingrad. Everyone knows the Battle of Stalingrad, in which it led to 2 million deaths of the Soviet people and some over 200,000 Germans in one city battle, fighting in Stalingrad. Now, what that means, the Germans are back. You'll see the Marder, which is the German IFV, and the German Leopard 2 tanks, which is familiar to all Russians. They're probably going to repaint it, but what is there to repaint? I mean, it's going to have the Ukrainian Iron Cross, which is like the German Iron Cross. So you're going to have the similar Iron Cross on these tanks that it's going to remind every 80-plus-year-old, 100 or near 90 to 100-year-old Soviet soldier. It will remind them of the Great War, the Great Patriotic War. Now, that was the Stalingrad battle, which swept through the Donbass region. So we're going to have a look at we're going to see this again in March when the German tanks arrive and are finally deployed throughout eastern Ukraine. And from then on, we're going to see the images that will remind the Russians of what they were all fighting against, Nazism and fascism. We're going to see that with NATO. The Germans are back, Nazism is back, fascism is back, and the Patriotic War redux is rekindled amongst the Russians. And for any non-aligned nations and members of BRICS Plus, this is only going to elevate the rest of the world against the Anglo-American hegemony, and as well and especially against the EU and the Ukrainians in particular. So you were going to see the return of the Germans, this time with the Anglo-Americans joining them along with the French. So you're going to see the French AMX-10 IFVs joining the Marder, German Marder IFVs, and the Bradley's IFVs, which is APCs, and joining with the Leopard 2, the Challenger 2 tanks, and the Abrams. You're going to see the Germans returning, this time with Anglo-Americans and French. Russia is up against all of Europe. And the rest of the world, China is gonna materially support Russia. It's morphed into the Patriotic War. So, returning back to the map, this is from Operation OWL. This is the OSINT map. What has happened since I last spoke about the Bakhmut area? Look at that. Klishchivka, where the 3rd Azov Brigade that I was speaking about previously were meant to drive out the Russians and the PMC of the Wagner Group. You can see that they had failed miserably. And where are the 3rd Azov Brigade? The Nazi Azov Brigade. They're over here. Sorry, that's the 93rd Mechanized Brigade. Now I wanted to talk about the 93rd Mechanized Brigade because these guys were the ones who did those 3-part documentary back in 2014 and 2015 at Donetsk City. They were responsible for bombing the Donetsk airport. There was a standoff between the DPR and the 93rd Mechanized Brigade. There is a YouTube on the 93rd. It talks about them. Now, these guys originally were fighting in Bakhmut. They backed off because they were severely bashed the crap out of. Now they went back to Kramatorsk. Obviously they've just reinforced themselves because they've come back from Kramatorsk. This is where they were, in Kramatorsk. So the 93rd were at Kramatorsk and they've come back. And they're joined with the Azov. Well, I've got to find the Azov first. Hold on, that's the Spartan Brigade. The Special Operations Center A, don't know what that means, but that's some special group. 60th Mechanized. Now, what are you going to realize with Bakhmut, according to the map, is that the Chechens and the Georgians are still remaining there as the front line for the Ukrainian military. Now that's the reason why you would realize that their fighting spirit is very compromised. Maybe because they're not Ukrainians. And it makes you realize also that the locals are not fighting the Russians. The locals have either left or they're embedded and they've become the waiters. The waiters was derisively coined against the locals because they consider themselves that they were waiting for the DPR and the Russians to liberate them. Now these are the Bakhmut locals. Now the people who are fighting for Bakhmut to retain Bakhmut and prevent the Russian expansion liberation are actually people who are not the Ukrainian soldiers are not from Bakhmut, let alone the Donetsk People's Republic, because obviously the Donetsk People's Republic are fighting for their liberation. Bakhmut is one of their cities, just like Mariupol. Mariupol is one of the DPR cities. Now that's where the West are on the wrong side of history. They are on the wrong side of history because they are on the side of the Nazis. That's the problem with this war, is that the wrong side. See, there's the Georgians, the Spartan Brigade. See, these people are on the wrong side of history, because I could have sworn that the NATO's were liberals and they were anti-fascist, and they were the ones who won the war. That's what we're led to believe, but apparently they didn't. Apparently the fascists won the war because Ukraine is having NATO defending them against Russia, and Russia is liberating their people, who are the Donetsk People's Republic and the Lugansk People's Republic, who are Russian, culturally Russian people. Now, that is the reason why NATO and America will never win this war, because it's the local people. It is the locals who live in that area, who have always lived there, who will remain there. Long after these soldiers have left, gone back to their homes, or are dead, the Ukrainians will leave this area. Why is that? Because they don't live here. Everyone's saying that they're defending their homeland. They're not defending their homeland. They're defending a geographical sovereignty map, but not the locals. The locals are DPR people. Now that's the problem with this history, is that the problem with this conflict, strategically, psychologically, socially, and politically, this is not a game of chess for these people. This is about them. This is the Azov battalion, or that is now morphed into one of their three brigades. Now this is the 3rd Azov assault brigade that I've been trying to look for. These guys were here at Klishivka. They were once at Klishivka, right at this area. They've now retreated back to Ivanivsky, and they're defending Ivanivsky. That's where they are now. Okay, so basically this is mid-February, and by the end of this month, this area should be all liberated by the Russians. There is a cauldron forming, as you can see. As soon as that is changed and that's covered by the Ukrainians, there is one avenue to escape, and that's through this way to Chasiv Yar. But apart from that, this here is going to morph into a cauldron or a pocket for the entrapped Chechens and Georgians who are defending the Ukrainian line of control. It's not going to work. They're going to retreat, and we're going to see the Russians advance even further towards Kramatorsk, as I had previously stated in my previous video. So that's all for now. Right, have a good day. Talk to you about as soon as we get to Kramatorsk, I reckon, because this is going to take a while. Russians are just taking their time. They're waiting for the German tanks to arrive to inspire the Russian people and the DPR, and you're going to see how NATO are on the wrong side of history. They're going to lose. You're always going to lose.